The helicopter blades cut through the thick Afghan air as Lieutenant Sarah Falcon Martinez adjusted her night vision goggles. Below them, the rugged mountains stretched endlessly, hiding secrets that had claimed too many lives. She pressed her earpiece closer, straining to hear the mission briefing over the rotor noise. Intel confirms the target is holed up in a compound 2 clicks from the landing zone. Commander Blake's voice crackled through the comm. This is a high-value target, people. We go in fast, we get our man, and we get out. Sarah nodded silently, her fingers dancing over her rifle's safety. The other SEALs in the helicopter gave her curious glances. She was the newest addition to Team Alpha, and they still weren't sure what to make of her. Her call sign Falcon had followed her from her previous assignment, but none of them knew why she'd earned it. Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez leaned over to his teammate. Still can't believe they stuck us with a bird, he whispered, thinking Sarah couldn't hear him over the engine noise. But she heard everything. She always had. The helicopter suddenly lurched to the right, avoiding ground fire that lit up the night sky like deadly fireworks. Sarah's hand shot out to steady herself, and in that moment, something shifted in her eyes. The other SEALs noticed it immediately, a predatory focus that seemed to pierce through the darkness itself. 2 minutes to LZ, the pilot announced. Sarah checked her gear one final time. Her hands moved with mechanical precision, but her mind was elsewhere, remembering the last time she'd been in these mountains, 3 months ago when everything went wrong, when her previous team didn't make it home, when she earned her call sign in a way that still haunted her dreams. The helicopter touched down with a soft thud, and Team Alpha moved out like shadows in the night. Sarah took point naturally, her movements fluid and confident. The other SEALs followed, but something about her gait made them exchange worried looks. She moved like she knew these mountains personally. The compound sat nestled between 2 rocky outcroppings, its walls casting long shadows in the moonlight. Sarah raised her hand, signaling the team to halt. Through her scope, she could see 3 guards patrolling the perimeter. Easy targets, but something felt wrong. Too quiet, she whispered into her mic. Commander Blake's voice came back immediately. Explained Falcon. Guards are walking in patterns. Too regular. Like they're expecting someone. Sarah's eyes scanned the surrounding hills. Years of training had taught her to trust her instincts, and right now every instinct screamed danger. Rodriguez moved up beside her. Looks normal to me, rookie. Maybe you're just nervous. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. She'd been called worse things by better men. Instead, she focused on the compound, watching the guards' movements more carefully. There, one of them checked his watch twice in 30 seconds. Another kept glancing toward the eastern ridge. We're walking into a trap, she said quietly. Commander Blake's voice cut through the radio chatter. Falcon, you have 30 seconds to explain or we're moving in. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, letting her other senses take over. The wind carried sounds from the compound. Too many voices for just 3 guards. The smell of cooking food meant more people than Intel suggested. And somewhere in the distance she could hear the faint rumble of vehicles. Sir, I count at least 12 voices from inside the compound. Intel said 6 maximum. There are vehicle engines running on the far side of the eastern ridge. Sounds like they're getting ready to move. And the guards keep checking the time like they're waiting for something. The team fell silent, processing her assessment. How could she hear and smell things they couldn't? Rodriguez, take Peterson and circle around to confirm Falcon's assessment, Blake ordered. 20 minutes later, Rodriguez's voice came back tense and urgent. Falcon was right, sir. I count 15 hostiles inside the compound, and there are 3 technical vehicles warming up behind the eastern ridge. Looks like they were planning to evacuate tonight. Blake looked at Sarah with new respect. How did you know? Sarah shouldered her rifle and checked her sidearm. Same way I always know, sir. I pay attention. But that wasn't the whole truth, and she knew it. The truth was something she'd never told anyone. Something that would sound crazy if she tried to explain it. Ever since that night 3 months ago when her team was ambushed and she was the only one who made it out, something had changed inside her. Her senses had become sharper, almost animal-like. She could hear heartbeats from 50 yards away. She could smell fear and aggression on the wind. And when danger was near, something primal awakened in her that scared even her. New plan, Blake announced. We wait for them to move, then intercept on the mountain road. Falcon, you take overwatch position on the northern ridge. Keep us informed of their movements. Sarah nodded and began climbing toward her assigned position. As she moved through the rocks, she felt the familiar change coming over her. Her breathing slowed, her movements became more fluid, and her senses expanded until she could practically feel the compound's inhabitants moving around inside the walls. From her perch on the ridge, she could see everything. The compound, the waiting vehicles, and the network of mountain roads that would allow their targets to escape if they moved too slowly. Through her scope, she watched the compound's main building, waiting for signs of movement. That's when she saw him, the high-value target they'd come for. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 35, with nervous eyes that kept darting toward the exit. More importantly, he was moving toward the vehicles earlier than expected. Command, target is moving now. Repeat, target is moving to vehicles. You have maybe 2 minutes before they're mobile. Blake's response was immediate. All units, move in now. Falcon, provide cover and keep that convoy from leaving. Sarah adjusted her scope and settled into position. Through the crosshairs, she could see the target climbing into the lead vehicle. The driver was already revving the engine. In 60 seconds, they would be gone, and months of intelligence work would be wasted. She took a deep breath and felt something wild and fierce stir in her chest. Her teammates were still 300 yards from the intercept point. The vehicles were about to move, and somewhere in the back of her mind, she could hear her old team leader's voice from 3 months ago, right before everything went wrong. When the moment comes, Falcon, don't hesitate. Do whatever it takes. The convoy started moving, headlights cutting through the darkness as they headed for the mountain road. Sarah's finger found her trigger, and for a moment time seemed to slow down. This was why they called her Falcon. Not because she was fast or precise, though she was both. They called her Falcon because when she hunted, she never missed her prey. Sarah's first shot disabled the lead vehicle's engine block with surgical precision. Steam poured from under the hood as the convoy ground to a halt on the narrow mountain road. The second vehicle immediately began reversing, trying to escape back toward the compound. Falcon to command, convoy is stopped. Lead vehicle disabled, secondary vehicle retreating. Through her scope, she could see armed men pouring out of the vehicles, taking defensive positions behind the rocky outcroppings along the road. The high-value target was still in the lead vehicle, but now he was trapped between her position and Team Alpha's advancing forces. Copy that, Falcon. Maintain overwatch. We're moving to intercept. Sarah shifted her position slightly, finding a better angle on the scattered hostiles. Her enhanced senses were working overtime now, picking up everything from whispered conversations in Pashto to the metallic smell of fear sweat. She could hear Commander Blake and his team approaching from the south, their careful footsteps echoing off the rocks. But something else caught her attention, a new sound that made her blood run cold. Helicopter rotors approaching fast from the northeast. Not American rotors. These had the distinctive whine of older Soviet aircraft, probably Mi-8s modified for combat. Command, we have incoming aircraft. 2 helicopters approaching from the northeast. Estimate 30 seconds to contact. Blake's response was immediate and tense. Can you identify? Sarah adjusted her scope toward the approaching aircraft. In the green glow of her night vision, she could make out weapon pods mounted on the helicopter's sides. Armed aircraft, sir. Looks like our high-value target called for backup. The situation had just become exponentially more dangerous. Team Alpha was caught in the open on the mountain road, with hostile helicopters approaching and armed men already in defensive positions. Sarah's position on the northern ridge made her the only one who could effectively engage the aircraft, but that would expose her location to everyone below. Falcon, can you take out those birds? Sarah checked her ammunition and calculated angles. Affirmative, sir, but I'll be compromised after the first shot. They'll know exactly where I am. Do it. The first helicopter crested the ridgeline, its searchlight sweeping across the mountain road below. Sarah could see the door gunner preparing to fire on her teammates' positions. She took a deep breath, led the target slightly to account for its movement, and squeezed the trigger. Her shot punched through the helicopter's fuel tank, sending it spinning out of control. It crashed into the mountainside in a ball of orange flame that lit up the entire valley. The second helicopter immediately began circling, trying to locate her position. But Sarah was already moving. The moment she fired, she'd rolled away from her position and begun scrambling across the rocky ridge. Her enhanced senses allowed her to move confidently in the darkness, finding handholds and footing that would be invisible to normal vision. The remaining helicopter's searchlight found her old position and immediately opened fire, chewing chunks out of the rocks where she'd been lying seconds before. Sarah kept moving, working her way around to a new firing position while the aircraft's attention was focused on empty space. From below, she could hear the firefight beginning in earnest. Team Alpha had engaged the ground forces, and the distinctive crack of American rifles mixed with the heavier chatter of AK-47s. But the helicopter was still a problem, hovering over the battlefield and preparing to rain down fire on her teammates. Sarah found a new position and quickly set up for another shot. This time, she aimed for the helicopter's tail rotor, a smaller target, but one that would send the aircraft into an uncontrollable spin, without the dramatic explosion that might harm friendlies below. Her second shot was as precise as her first. The helicopter's tail rotor disintegrated, and the aircraft began spinning wildly before crashing into the valley on the opposite side of the road. The sudden silence that followed was deafening. "Both aircraft down," she reported. "Outstanding shooting, Falcon. Now get down here and help us clean up this mess." Sarah began making her way down the ridge toward the road. As she moved, she could hear the firefight winding down. Team Alpha was professional and well-trained, and without air support, the hostile ground forces were quickly overwhelmed. But as she approached the road, her enhanced hearing picked up something that made her freeze. Footsteps, moving carefully through the rocks above her previous position. Someone was trying to flank her teammates from the north, using the helicopter crashes as a distraction. "Command, you have a flanking element moving through the rocks above your position. At least 4 individuals armed approaching from the north." Blake's voice came back strained. "Can you intercept?" Sarah looked down at the road where her teammates were finishing their engagement, then up at the rocks where the flanking force was moving. She was caught between them, and there wasn't time to warn anyone else. "Negative, sir. I'm going to handle this myself." Sarah began climbing again, this time moving toward the flanking force instead of away from it. Her enhanced senses gave her a massive advantage in the darkness. She could hear their breathing, smell their gun oil, even detect the subtle vibrations their footsteps made in the rock. She found them positioned behind a large boulder, preparing to fire down on Team Alpha's position. 4 men, as she'd estimated, armed with automatic weapons and grenades. They were focused on the road below, completely unaware that death was approaching from behind. Sarah's training took over. She moved like a shadow, closing the distance until she was less than 20 feet away. The first man never knew what hit him, a knife between the ribs, quick and silent. The second turned just in time to see her before she snapped his neck with her bare hands. The third and fourth men realized they were under attack and tried to bring their weapons to bear. But Sarah was already among them, moving with an inhuman speed and grace that her teammates had never seen. By the time the shooting stopped, all 4 hostiles were down, and Sarah was breathing hard but uninjured. "Flanking element neutralized," she reported. When she finally reached the road, she found Team Alpha securing the high-value target and treating their 1 wounded member. Peterson had taken a bullet in the shoulder, but it wasn't life-threatening. Commander Blake looked at her with something approaching awe. "How many of them were there?" he asked. 4. "And you took them all down by yourself?" Sarah shrugged, checking her rifle. "They weren't expecting company." Rodriguez walked over, carrying equipment recovered from the vehicles. "Found something interesting in the lead vehicle," he said, holding up a military-grade radio. "Our target was in communication with someone big. This operation was planned from the top." Blake examined the radio, his expression growing more serious. "This changes things. If they knew we were coming, then we have a leak somewhere. Someone with access to classified mission information." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. 3 months ago, when her previous team was ambushed, they'd suspected a leak then too. The parallels were too obvious to ignore. "Sir, we need to get off this mountain now," she said quietly. "If there's a leak, then whoever's running this operation knows we're here. The helicopters we just shot down? Someone's going to notice when they don't report in." As if summoned by her words, the team's radio crackled to life with an urgent message from base. "Alpha Team, we're showing multiple aircraft launching from enemy positions. You need immediate extraction. We're sending birds to your location now." Blake looked around at his team, then back at Sarah. "How did you know?" Sarah shouldered her rifle and began moving toward the extraction point. "Same way I always know, sir. I pay attention." But again, that wasn't the whole truth. The truth was that her enhanced senses were telling her something else, something that made her stomach clench with dread. Someone had been watching this operation from the beginning, someone with access to American communication frequencies and extraction procedures. and that someone wanted her specifically to survive tonight. The question was why. The extraction helicopter arrived just as enemy aircraft appeared on the horizon. Sarah could hear them before anyone else. The distinctive sound of attack helicopters moving in formation, at least 6 of them. Team Alpha loaded their wounded teammate and the high-value target into the bird, while Sarah provided cover from the landing zone perimeter. "We need to move now," she called out, watching the approaching aircraft through her scope. "They're coming in hot, and they're not planning to take prisoners." The pilot was already spinning up the rotors when the first enemy round started impacting around the landing zone. Sarah returned fire, her shots forcing the lead helicopter to break off its attack run. But there were too many of them, and they were closing fast. "Falcon, get on the bird," Commander Blake shouted over the rotor noise. Sarah made a decision that would change everything. Instead of boarding the helicopter, she grabbed her gear and sprinted toward a rocky outcropping that would give her a better firing position. "Negative, sir." "Get out of here. I'll keep them busy and find another way home." Before Blake could argue, she was gone, disappearing into the rocks like a ghost. The extraction helicopter lifted off immediately, climbing rapidly to avoid the incoming fire. Sarah watched it disappear into the night sky, then turned her attention to the enemy aircraft now circling the landing zone. She had ammunition for maybe 10 minutes of sustained fire. No backup, no extraction plan, and 6 enemy helicopters hunting for her. Most soldiers would have considered this a death sentence. Sarah felt strangely calm. Her enhanced senses kicked into overdrive as she moved through the rocks. She could hear the helicopter's engines track their movements by sound alone, even detect the subtle changes in pitch that told her when they were preparing to fire. More importantly, she could sense something else: ground forces moving up the mountain to surround her position. Sarah found a defensive position in a natural cave formation and began planning her survival strategy. The enemy forces were coordinating their search, but they were making a critical mistake. They were hunting for a normal soldier, someone who would follow standard evasion procedures. They had no idea what she was capable of. The first helicopter to find her position paid for the discovery with its life. Sarah's shot took out the pilot, sending the aircraft spinning into the mountainside. But the crash revealed her location to the other 5 helicopters, which immediately converged on her position. Sarah was already moving again when the rocket started impacting around the cave. She used the terrain to her advantage, staying low and using the rocky outcroppings for cover. Her enhanced hearing allowed her to track all 5 remaining aircraft simultaneously, predicting their movements and staying one step ahead of their search patterns. But the ground forces were closing in, and Sarah knew she couldn't run forever. She needed to even the odds, and that meant taking bigger risks. She worked her way around to a position directly below one of the circling helicopters and waited for the perfect moment. When the aircraft passed overhead, Sarah did something that no normal human could have managed. She fired a grappling hook from her gear, caught the helicopter's landing skid, and hauled herself up to the aircraft while it was still in flight. The door gunner's surprise lasted exactly long enough for Sarah to reach the passenger compartment. By the time the pilot realized what was happening, Sarah had eliminated the gunner and was pressing her sidearm against the pilot's head. "Land this aircraft now, or I paint the cockpit with your brains," she said in fluent Pashto. The pilot was too shocked to argue. He brought the helicopter down in a clearing half a mile from Sarah's original position. Sarah zip-tied the pilot to his controls, grabbed the aircraft's radio, and set the helicopter's fuel tanks to leak slowly. She'd be long gone before it became a fire hazard, but the destruction would deny the aircraft to enemy forces. Using the captured radio, Sarah listened to the enemy communications. What she heard made her blood run cold. The voice coordinating the search operation was speaking English with an American accent, using American military terminology and call signs. Someone on the American side was directing this hunt. Sarah recorded as much of the conversation as she could before destroying the radio and disappearing back into the rocks. She now had proof that there was a traitor in the American military structure, someone with access to classified operations and real-time intelligence. The remaining 4 helicopters spent 2 hours searching for her before finally giving up and returning to base. Sarah waited another hour to make sure they were really gone before beginning her journey toward the extraction point she'd memorized during mission planning. It was a 12-mile hike through hostile territory, but Sarah's enhanced senses made her nearly invisible in the darkness. She could hear enemy patrols from half a mile away, smell their cooking fires and vehicle exhaust long before they became visible. More importantly, she could sense their emotions: fear, frustration, anger, which told her how aggressively they were searching. By dawn, she'd covered 8 miles without being detected. She found a concealed position in a rock formation and settled in to rest during the daylight hours. That's when she made a discovery that changed everything she thought she knew about her situation. Hidden in her gear, she found a small tracking device that hadn't been there during the mission briefing. Someone had planted it on her equipment, someone with access to Team Alpha's preparation area. The device was sophisticated, military-grade, and completely undetectable to normal inspection. Sarah stared at the device for a long moment, understanding finally dawning. The ambush 3 months ago, the leak in tonight's operation, the coordinated hunt by enemy forces, it was all connected. Someone had been tracking her, studying her, testing her abilities. She thought about destroying the device, but then had a better idea. If someone wanted to track her movements, she could use that to her advantage. Sarah carefully modified the device's signal, introducing a subtle delay that would make her appear to be several hundred yards away from her actual position. As night fell, she resumed her journey toward the extraction point, but now she had a new mission objective. She needed to identify the traitor who had been feeding information to enemy forces. And she needed to figure out why that person seemed so interested in her specifically. The final 4 miles to the extraction point took her through a valley that had been the site of heavy fighting months earlier. Sarah's enhanced senses picked up something that stopped her cold: the smell of recently disturbed earth, and underneath it, the distinctive scent of decomposition. She investigated carefully and found a hidden mass grave containing the bodies of American soldiers. Their dog tags identified them as members of special operations units that had been reported missing in action over the past 6 months. All of them had been captured alive and executed. Sarah documented the scene with her camera and collected the dog tags as evidence. But as she was preparing to leave, she found something that made her hands shake with rage. At the bottom of the grave was a familiar piece of equipment, a radio identical to the one she'd found in tonight's captured vehicle. Someone in the American military structure wasn't just leaking information to enemy forces. They were actively collaborating in the capture and execution of American soldiers. And based on the tracking device in her gear, she was supposed to be the next victim. Sarah looked up at the stars and felt something predatory and dangerous awakening in her chest. She'd spent 3 months wondering why she was the only survivor of her team's ambush, why her senses had become so enhanced, why she felt more like a hunting animal than a human soldier. Now she understood. She hadn't just survived that ambush by accident. She'd been deliberately spared, modified somehow, turned into something that could hunt in ways that normal humans couldn't. The question was whether the people who'd done this to her realized they'd created something they couldn't control. As she resumed her journey toward the extraction point, Sarah made a silent promise to the dead soldiers in the mass grave. She would find the traitor responsible for their deaths, and when she did, they would discover exactly why the other soldiers called her Falcon. Some predators, once they found their prey, never let go. The extraction point was the abandoned village that had been cleared of civilians months earlier. Sarah approached carefully, using her enhanced senses to scan for any signs of ambush. The place felt wrong, too quiet, too clean, like it had been prepared specifically for her arrival. She found a concealed observation position on a hillside overlooking the village and settled in to wait. According to her mission briefing, the extraction team would arrive at 0200 hours. It was now 0130, which gave her 30 minutes to assess the situation. Through her scope, Sarah could see that the village appeared empty, but her other senses told a different story. She could smell gun oil and human sweat, detect the subtle vibrations of carefully controlled breathing. There were at least 8 people hidden in the village waiting for her to walk into their trap. But there was something else, something that made her blood run cold. One of the scents she was picking up was familiar. American soap, American deodorant, the distinctive smell of MRE rations. At least some of the people waiting for her were American military personnel. Sarah checked her equipment and found that the modified tracking device was still functioning, showing her position as several hundred yards away from where she actually was. If the people in the village were relying on the tracker to locate her, they would be looking in the wrong place. At exactly 200 hours, she heard the approaching helicopter. But as it came into view, Sarah realized it wasn't the extraction bird she'd been expecting. This was a different aircraft, one she didn't recognize, and it was landing in the center of the village rather than at the designated extraction point. Through her scope, she watched as armed figures emerged from their hiding places to surround the helicopter. Most of them were local fighters, but 3 were clearly American. She could tell by their equipment, their movements, their posture. One of them was giving orders to the others. Sarah adjusted her scope and focused on the American leader. When she saw his face, her world tilted sideways. It was Major William Cross, her commanding officer from 3 months ago. The man who had sent her team on the mission that ended in ambush. The man who had written her up for commendation after she was the only survivor. Major Cross walked around the village, checking positions and coordinating with the local fighters. He was clearly in charge of the operation, speaking fluent Pashto and handling equipment that Sarah recognized as captured American military gear. Sarah's enhanced hearing picked up fragments of conversation as Cross coordinated the search. The tracker shows her position as northeast of the village, but sweep the entire area. She's more dangerous than you realize. When you find her, do not attempt to capture her alive. Kill her immediately. One of the local fighters asked a question in Pashto, and Cross responded with chilling casualness. Because she's not entirely human anymore. The modifications we made to her during recovery were more successful than we anticipated. She's become something we can't control. Sarah's hands began to shake as the pieces fell into place. The ambush 3 months ago hadn't been an intelligence failure. It had been deliberately planned. Her team had been sacrificed to provide cover for Cross's operation, and she had been captured, not rescued. During the week she'd spent in what she thought was medical recovery, she'd actually been subjected to experimental procedures. That explained her enhanced senses, her improved reflexes, her almost supernatural awareness of danger. They had turned her into a weapon, then lost control of that weapon when her human conscience proved stronger than their conditioning. Cross continued briefing his team. She was supposed to be a perfect operative. Enhanced senses, improved physical capabilities, complete loyalty to mission objectives. But the psychological conditioning didn't take properly. She retained too much of her original personality. Sarah listened as Cross explained how they'd been tracking her performance, studying her abilities, trying to understand why their experimental program had failed to produce a controllable asset. Tonight's mission had been designed to put her in a situation where they could eliminate her and recover her body for further study. The program has potential, Cross was saying, but we need subjects with less developed moral frameworks. Veterans with extensive combat experience are too psychologically stable. We need to start with younger subjects, preferably ones with existing psychological trauma. Sarah had heard enough. She now understood exactly what had happened to her, and why she felt more like a predator than a human. They had tried to turn her into something monstrous, and while they had enhanced her capabilities, they had failed to destroy her humanity. But they were planning to continue the program with other soldiers, other victims who would be subjected to the same experimental procedures. Sarah couldn't let that happen. She began moving carefully through the rocks, working her way around to a position where she could engage the entire group. Her enhanced senses allowed her to track all 8 hostile positions simultaneously, planning her attack pattern for maximum effectiveness. Major Cross was still coordinating the search when Sarah's first shot dropped one of the local fighters. Before the body hit the ground, she had shifted position and taken out a second target. The remaining fighters began firing wildly in all directions, unable to locate her muzzle flashes in the darkness. Sarah moved like a ghost through the village, appearing long enough to eliminate a target before vanishing back into the shadows. Her enhanced senses gave her an enormous advantage. She could hear their panicked breathing, smell their fear sweat, track their movements by the vibrations their footsteps made in the ground. Within 10 minutes, she had eliminated all 6 local fighters. Only Major Cross and his 2 American accomplices remained, and they had barricaded themselves in the village's main building. "Sarah," Cross called out, "I know you can hear me." "We need to talk." Sarah positioned herself where she could see the building's entrance. "We're talking, Major. Start explaining why you turned me into a monster." "You're not a monster," Cross replied. "You're the future of special operations. Enhanced soldiers with capabilities that normal humans can't match. You've seen what you can do. The reflexes, the senses, the physical improvements. We gave you gifts. You gave me nightmares, Sarah shot back. You killed my team and tortured me for weeks while I thought I was recovering. Sacrifices had to be made for the greater good. The program will save countless American lives by creating soldiers who can operate in environments where normal humans would fail. Sarah's anger was building to a dangerous level. And the mass grave I found? The executed prisoners? How does that serve the greater good? There was a long pause before Cross responded. Intelligence gathering requires difficult choices. Some prisoners provided information that saved American lives. Others didn't. You're a traitor and a war criminal, Sarah said flatly, and you're going to pay for what you've done. Sarah, think about this logically. You can't go back to your old life. The enhancements we gave you are permanent. You'll never be a normal soldier again. Work with us and we can help you understand what you've become. Sarah closed her eyes and felt the predatory instincts that Cross's experiments had awakened. They were right about one thing. She wasn't entirely human anymore. But they were wrong about her loyalty. The enhancements had made her more dangerous, but they hadn't destroyed her moral compass. You're right, Major, I can't go back to who I was, but that doesn't mean I'm going to become what you wanted me to be. Sarah stood up from her concealed position and walked openly toward the building where Cross and his accomplices were hiding. She wasn't trying to hide anymore, wasn't using stealth or tactics. She was just walking forward like a predator approaching cornered prey. Last chance, Major, surrender now, and I'll make sure you live long enough to stand trial. Cross's response was a burst of automatic weapons fire from the building's windows, but Sarah was no longer where the muzzle flashes indicated. She was already inside the building, moving with inhuman speed and silence. The two American accomplices never saw her coming. Cross found himself alone in the darkness, facing something that had once been one of his soldiers but was now something entirely different. "Hello, Major," Sarah said quietly. "Time to find out what happens when your experiment decides to hunt you." In the darkness of the abandoned village, Major Cross finally understood what he had created, and he realized that some predators once awakened could never be controlled. Major Cross fired blindly into the darkness, his muzzle flashes illuminating empty spaces where Sarah had been seconds before. She moved through the building like flowing water, her enhanced senses allowing her to navigate in complete darkness while he stumbled around in terror. "You can't hide from me, Major." Sarah's voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "I can hear your heartbeat. I can smell your fear. The modifications you gave me work better than you realized." Cross backed against a wall, trying to control his breathing. "Sarah, listen to me. The program isn't finished. We've learned from the mistakes we made with you. The next generation of enhanced soldiers will be perfect, completely loyal, utterly effective. That's exactly why you need to die," Sarah replied, her voice now coming from directly behind him. Cross spun around, but she was already gone. A hand reached out of the darkness and disarmed him with surgical precision, his rifle clattering across the floor into the shadows. He drew his sidearm, but another hand emerged to twist his wrist until he dropped the weapon with a cry of pain. "Tell me about the other subjects," Sarah commanded, stepping into view. In the dim light filtering through the windows, Cross could see that her eyes had changed. They reflected light like an animal's, glowing with an inhuman intensity. "There are no other subjects," Cross lied. "The program was discontinued after your complications." Sarah grabbed him by the throat and lifted him off the ground with one hand. Her strength had increased far beyond normal human levels, another gift from Cross's experimental procedures. "I can hear your pulse rate, Major. I know when you're lying. Tell me the truth." Cross gasped for air as her grip tightened. "There are 12 others, soldiers who were reported killed in action, but were actually brought to the facility for enhancement. They're in various stages of the program." "Where?" "Classified research facility in Germany." "But Sarah, you have to understand, they volunteered for this. They knew the risks." Sarah's grip loosened slightly, allowing Cross to breathe. "They volunteered to be guinea pigs for your twisted experiments?" "They volunteered to serve their country in ways that normal soldiers can't, just like you did." "I never volunteered for this," Sarah snarled. "You kidnapped me and tortured me while I thought I was recovering from injuries." Cross struggled against her grip, his face turning red from lack of oxygen. "The psychological conditioning was necessary. We had to break down your existing personality structure to rebuild you as an enhanced operative." Sarah threw him across the room, where he crashed into a wooden table and collapsed to the floor. "You broke my mind and rebuilt it to suit your purposes. You turned me into a weapon." Cross coughed up blood but managed to speak. A weapon that saved countless lives. Your enhanced abilities allowed you to complete missions that would have been impossible for normal soldiers. Tonight alone, you eliminated multiple threats and extracted valuable intelligence. Tonight, I discovered that my commanding officer is a traitor who's been selling American soldiers to enemy forces for experimental purposes, Sarah corrected. How many teams have you sacrificed to cover your operations? Cross wiped blood from his mouth and tried to stand. 7 teams over the past 18 months. 43 soldiers total. Their sacrifice allowed us to perfect the enhancement procedures and gather intelligence on enemy operations. Sarah's enhanced hearing picked up the sound of approaching vehicles. Multiple engines. Moving fast toward the village. Cross heard them too and smiled despite his injuries. My backup team, he explained. They've been monitoring the situation. If I didn't report in by 0300 hours, they were instructed to sterilize the area. Sarah checked her watch. It was 0255 hours. Sterilize? Complete elimination of all evidence, including you. They're carrying enough explosives to level this entire village. Sarah's mind raced through her options. She could kill Cross and try to escape before the explosives team arrived. But that would leave the other 12 enhanced soldiers trapped in the German facility. She could try to capture Cross and extract him for interrogation, but the approaching team would complicate that significantly. How many vehicles? She asked. Cross looked surprised by the question. 3 trucks, 18 men total. All enhanced soldiers from the first generation of the program. Unlike you, their psychological conditioning was successful. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. She was about to face 18 soldiers who had been subjected to the same enhancement procedures she had, but without the moral constraints that had saved her humanity. They're like me, but without conscience, she said quietly. They're what you were supposed to become. Perfect soldiers with enhanced capabilities and complete loyalty to their mission objectives. The sound of the approaching vehicles was getting louder. Sarah could distinguish individual engine notes now, track their positions and speeds. They would reach the village in less than 2 minutes. Last chance, Major. Call them off and tell me everything about the German facility. Cross laughed, spraying more blood. Even if I wanted to help you, I can't call them off. They're operating under standing orders. Once they reach the village, they'll complete their mission regardless of what I say. Sarah grabbed her rifle and checked her ammunition. She had enough for maybe 5 minutes of sustained combat, assuming perfect accuracy. Against 18 enhanced soldiers, that might not be enough. Tell me about their capabilities, she demanded. Enhanced reflexes, improved strength, heightened senses, just like you. But they also have enhanced aggression and reduced pain sensitivity. They'll keep fighting until they're physically incapable of continuing. The vehicles were now close enough that Sarah could hear individual voices over the engine noise. The enhanced soldiers were coordinating their approach, planning to surround the village and eliminate all resistance before setting their explosives. Sarah made a decision that surprised even her. Instead of running or trying to hide, she dragged Cross to the window and positioned him where the approaching team could see him. Here's what's going to happen. Major, you're going to order your enhanced soldiers to stand down. If you don't, I'm going to kill you right here in front of them. And then I'm going to kill every one of them. You can't fight 18 enhanced soldiers and win, Cross protested. Sarah checked her weapons one final time and felt the predatory instincts that Cross's experiments had awakened. You're probably right, but I'm going to try anyway. And even if they kill me, I'm going to take enough of them with me to cripple your program. The first vehicle crested the hill overlooking the village, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Sarah could see armed figures moving in the back of the truck. Preparing to deploy, make your choice, Major, call them off. Or watch me turn your perfect soldiers into casualties. Cross looked out at his approaching reinforcements, then back at Sarah. In her eyes, he saw something that made him finally understand what his experiments had really created. Not a perfect soldier, but something far more dangerous. A predator with a conscience. Enhanced capabilities guided by human morality. Alpha Team. This is Cross, he spoke into his radio with shaking hands. Abort mission. Repeat, abort mission and return to base. The response came back immediately. Negative, sir. Standing orders require mission completion regardless of field conditions. Cross looked at Sarah with something approaching respect. They won't obey my orders. The psychological conditioning makes them incapable of mission abort once they've been deployed. Sarah shouldered her rifle and moved toward the window. Then I guess we find out what happens when an enhanced soldier with a conscience fights enhanced soldiers without one. The trucks were now entering the village, and Sarah could see the enhanced soldiers deploying with mechanical precision. They moved like her, with the same fluid grace and predatory awareness. But there was something missing in their movements, the hesitation that came from human empathy. 18 against 1, Cross observed. Those aren't good odds. Sarah smiled, and for the first time, Cross saw the predator that his experiments had truly created. You're right, Major. It's not fair to them. The first enhanced soldier rounded the corner of the building just as Sarah opened fire. The hunt was about to begin, and Sarah intended to show Cross exactly what his experiments had accomplished when they tried to turn a human being into a weapon. Sarah's first shot dropped the lead enhanced soldier before he could bring his weapon to bear. But unlike normal soldiers, he didn't stay down. The enhanced pain tolerance and aggression that Cross had mentioned became immediately apparent as the wounded soldier continued advancing, firing his rifle one-handed while blood poured from his shoulder. Sarah put a second round center mass, finally stopping him permanently. But the brief engagement had revealed her position to the other 17 enhanced soldiers, who immediately began coordinating their assault with inhuman precision. They're good, Sarah admitted, rolling away from the window as automatic weapons fire shredded the wall where she'd been standing. They're perfect, Cross corrected from his position on the floor. No hesitation, no fear, no moral constraints. Everything you could have been if the conditioning had worked properly. Sarah moved through the building like a ghost, using her enhanced senses to track the approaching soldiers while staying ahead of their search pattern. But she quickly realized that they were using the same enhanced senses to track her. This wasn't going to be a typical engagement where she could rely on superior awareness and reflexes. The enhanced soldiers had divided into 3 teams of 6, surrounding the building and preparing to assault from multiple directions simultaneously. Sarah could hear their whispered communications, detect their movements through vibrations in the floor, even smell their equipment and ammunition. But they could do the same to her. Sarah found a central position in the building and prepared for the assault. When it came, it was like nothing she'd ever experienced. The enhanced soldiers moved with perfect coordination, breaching doors and windows simultaneously while maintaining overlapping fields of fire. Sarah's enhanced reflexes allowed her to engage multiple targets almost simultaneously, but the soldiers' enhanced durability meant that several of them continued fighting, despite taking what would normally be fatal wounds. She was forced to use more ammunition than planned, burning through her magazine faster than she could afford. By the time she'd eliminated the first assault team, she was down to her last magazine and 2 grenades. The remaining 12 enhanced soldiers had pulled back to reassess, but Sarah knew they were planning something more aggressive. "You can't win this," Cross called out. "They'll keep coming until you're dead or out of ammunition." Sarah reloaded her rifle and checked her remaining grenades. "Maybe, but I'm going to make them pay for every inch." The second assault came from an unexpected direction, through the floor. The enhanced soldiers had planted explosives under the building, blowing a hole in the floor large enough for them to assault from below. Sarah barely managed to throw herself clear as the explosion brought down half the building. Fighting in the rubble, Sarah's enhanced agility gave her a temporary advantage. She used the debris for cover, while engaging targets with her remaining ammunition, but the enhanced soldiers adapted quickly, using their own superior physical capabilities to navigate the destroyed building. Sarah eliminated 4 more soldiers before her rifle ran dry. She drew her sidearm and continued fighting, but 8 enhanced soldiers were still operational, and they were closing in on her position. That's when Sarah did something that Cross hadn't anticipated. Instead of trying to fight all 8 soldiers directly, she grabbed Cross and used him as a human shield while moving toward the building's exit. "You bastards want to complete your mission?" she shouted. "Then you'll have to shoot through your commanding officer to do it." The enhanced soldiers hesitated for the first time since the engagement began. Their psychological conditioning had programmed them to protect valuable assets, and Cross was the most valuable asset in the area. Sarah used their momentary confusion to reach the building's exit, still keeping Cross between herself and the enhanced soldiers. Once outside, she spotted something that changed the tactical situation entirely. The trucks the enhanced soldiers had arrived in were still running, their engines warm and ready. "New plan," she told. "Cross, we're leaving." Sarah dragged Cross toward the nearest truck while the Enhanced soldiers tried to find firing angles that wouldn't endanger their commanding officer. She threw Cross into the passenger seat and climbed behind the wheel just as the soldiers realized what she was planning. The truck was armored and equipped with military-grade communications equipment. As Sarah drove away from the village, she could hear the enhanced soldiers coordinating pursuit using their remaining vehicles. "Where are we going?" Cross asked, blood still trickling from his earlier injuries. "Germany," Sarah replied, flooring the accelerator as she navigated the mountain roads. "You're going to help me shut down your research facility and free the other enhanced soldiers." Cross laughed despite his pain. "Even if we could reach Germany without being caught, the facility is heavily defended. You can't assault a military installation by yourself." Sarah checked the truck's GPS system and communications equipment. "I'm not going to assault it. I'm going to infiltrate it, and you're going to help me." Over the next several hours, as they drove through the mountains toward the nearest airfield, Cross told Sarah everything about the German facility. It was a converted research hospital staffed by a combination of scientists and military personnel. The 12 enhanced soldiers were being held in a medical wing while undergoing final conditioning procedures. "The conditioning process takes 30 days, Cross explained. "We learned from your case that rushing the psychological modification leads to incomplete loyalty programming." Sarah felt sick thinking about the soldiers being tortured in the same way she had been. "How long have they been there?" "The longest has been there for 3 weeks. The newest arrived 5 days ago," Sarah calculated quickly. If Cross was telling the truth, some of the soldiers might still retain enough of their original personalities to be saved. But the ones who had been there longer might already be lost to the conditioning process. They reached the airfield just as dawn was breaking over the mountains. Sarah used Cross's authorization codes to commandeer a military transport aircraft, forcing the flight crew to file a flight plan for Germany. During the flight, Sarah used the aircraft's communication systems to contact Team Alpha. Commander Blake's voice came through clearly, relief evident when he heard she was alive. "Falcon, where the hell are you? We've been trying to reach you for 12 hours. Sir, I need you to listen carefully. Major Cross is a traitor who's been running an illegal enhancement program using captured American soldiers. I have him in custody and I'm en route to Germany to shut down his research facility." There was a long pause before Blake responded. "Falcon, that's a serious accusation. Do you have proof?" Sarah looked at Cross, who was listening to the conversation with interest. "I have recordings of enemy communications showing American personnel coordinating attacks on U.S. forces. I have evidence of a mass grave containing executed American soldiers. And I have Major Cross himself, who's already confessed to running the program. Even if that's true, you can't conduct unauthorized operations on foreign soil. Return to base immediately for debriefing." Sarah considered her options carefully. If she returned to base, Cross would probably disappear into the military justice system. The enhanced soldiers in Germany would complete their conditioning, and the program would continue under new leadership. "Negative, sir. I'm going to complete this mission first." "Falcon out." Sarah cut the communication link and turned to Cross. "Last chance, Major. Help me save those soldiers, or I'll make sure the world knows exactly what you've been doing." Cross studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You know, Sarah, I think I finally understand what went wrong with your conditioning. We tried to remove your humanity, but we only made it stronger. You're not just an enhanced soldier, you're an enhanced human being." "Is that supposed to be a compliment?" "It's an observation, and maybe an apology." As the aircraft flew toward Germany, Sarah began planning the most important mission of her life. She was going to infiltrate a heavily defended research facility, rescue 12 enhanced soldiers, and expose a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of military command. And she was going to do it with the help of the man who had tried to destroy her humanity in the first place. Some hunts, Sarah reflected, had endings that nobody could predict.